Hello, my name is Hannah. Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, hi, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. We're starting a new reading vlog today. If you've been here before, you will know that I have this little jar of prompts that I wrote for myself that are reading vlog prompts, and it's all part of an incredibly brilliant plan to tackle my unread books, because I have a lot of books sat on my shelf that I want to read and yet haven't. So the idea of the jar is that it's going to force me to pick some books to read. So, as you'll probably know from the thumbnail, the prompt that I picked was Farmer picks. Farmer's my best friend. So she has chosen a stack of books. Now I sent her a video of my unread shelves and was like, pick 7, because then I'll pick the 3 that I'm like in the mood to read of the 7. And she has picked 7 books that I'm very in the mood for. So buckle in and get a cup of tea in case this vlog is like an hour and a half long because I read 7 books. Or I might do part 1, part 2. Who knows? You'll probably know better than me. You're in the future. So this is just very quick hello, and I'm going to introduce you to the books. I'm not going to do blurbs. I am just going to tell you what Farmer told me. So all bar one of these are books that she has read. So, and actually, well, some of these books are books that she has given me. So we're going to do that, and I won't do blurbs because I'm going to be reading them probably in this video. So first up we have Detransition Baby by Torrey. Farmer says, reads like a soap opera, which sometimes you just need, you know? I listened to it, so I'd be interested to hear what it's like to read. So that is the first one. Kind of like an easy read, sort of drama, I guess. The next one is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Farmer said, a cute romp like The Great Gatsby meets Agatha Christie in a memoir. Whoa. Light reading, nothing taxing, a love letter to old Hollywood. Will go through various emotions to do with the protagonist. Shoehorned bisexual character is a flaw, though. Okay, interesting. I have read, what was it called? The Devil in the Deep Water by Stuart Turton. And that was also a romp that, like, I quite enjoyed reading, even though it was full of plot holes, but like I had a lovely time. So I will maybe forgive some shoehorned by characters. I mean, at least he's made an effort to put a bisexual character in his book, you know what I mean? The next one is His Bloody Project by Graeme Macrae Burnet. You can't see that very well because of the glare. There we go. Farmer says, such an interesting commentary on a community I knew nothing about. Amazing source material. You'll feel sorry for the murderer, and I kind of love that. I was about to be like, oh my god, what a spoiler. But I know I said I wouldn't do blurbs, but it says, the year is 1869, a brutal triple murder. Okay, fine. So we know there's going to be a murder, so that's fine. So we've got this. Then we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which all she said is, what? You haven't read this? Girl, it is a roller coaster. So, great. Sorry, there's a man just running down the street carrying a child. Got quite distracted. It's his child. So we have Piranesi. Cool. And then we have really good actually by Heisey, which Farmer says made me laugh. Not really a story, but a good commentary. She is the worst of all of us. Vibe. I do love this cover. We then have a book that actually we went to the book tour of this together, and I still haven't read it. We have the Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. Farmer says, excellent, loved it even more than Hamnet, and I loved Hamnet even more than Farmer loved Hamnet. So really atmospheric, really claustrophobic, especially as you know the fate before you start. So really excited to read this one. And then finally, this is Cuddy by Benjamin Myers. So Farmer got me this for my birthday a couple of months ago, and all she said is, please read it so that I can borrow. That's what friends are for, hey? This is the main reason you ever buy your friends books, right? You buy the books because you want the book and you want to borrow the book, or is that not what you do? So there is my stack. It's quite a nice blend. As I said, I'm kind of vibing with all of these for different reasons. So I think Cuddy, Marriage Portrait, and his Bloody Project and Piranesi are kind of a bit heavier, maybe a bit more literary, a bit more like, you know, whereas I think Detransition Baby, Evelyn, Hardcastle, and Really Good Actually are kind of like a bit more like commercial fiction, bit more you know, easy reading. So actually I think they might all kind of work as quite nice counterpoints. So I need to pick one to start with, because I'm about to get on a train to London, where I've got some other things that I'm reading, but obviously, you know, when you go away, you have to overpack books just in case you happen to finish. So I'm currently reading something on my e-reader, and I've got a whole other book, but I like to have choices. So, but I've got limited space, so I definitely can't bring any of the hardbacks, which means I'm choosing one of these four. God. I think I'm gonna absolutely adore Piranesi. So like, do we start with the one I'm most excited about? Oh my God, she's overthinking it. I'm gonna do Detransition. I'm gonna do Detransition Baby. We're gonna start with this. Man, I'm so excited. Okay, bye for now, and I will check in with you when I have read some of this, and maybe you'll see some footage of something. I am notorious for saying, I'm going to London with work, so I'll show you some of London, and then I don't show you any of London, and the next thing you see is a dog walk, of which I do many. So either London or a dog walk, possibly some food, who the fuck knows. Enjoy. See you in a sec. Bye. Hello. I finished reading my first book. I am going to tell you about it while I roast some rhubarb, because one of my neighbours had excess rhubarb and said she wants some rhubarb, and I thought, yes, I do. So yeah, I have finished Detransition Baby. I finished it about 10 minutes ago. So this is all quite fresh in terms of thoughts, but I really liked it. I think, okay, let's start with the setup. So this is about 3 people. Firstly, Ames. So Ames is a detransitioned trans woman. So they were assigned male at birth, transitioned, became Amy, and then detransitioned, and are now going as Ames, a sort of cisgendered man. And Katrina is a cis woman who Ames has been having a relationship with. And then we also have Reese, who is the ex-girlfriend of Amy. Reese is another trans woman. We clear there? So Ames, formerly a trans woman, now identifying as a cisgendered male or a detransitioned trans woman. His girlfriend / boss, Katrina, and then Reese, who is a transgender woman. And the premise of the book is basically that Ames thought he was sterile because that's what he'd been told by doctors, that because he'd been on estrogen for so long, when he was living as a trans woman, that he therefore wouldn't be able to have children and he was sterile. And so he doesn't think anything of not using a condom when he's sleeping with Katrina, and Katrina gets pregnant. And essentially what the book, that's not a spoiler, that happens right at the start. I mean, detransition baby, I suppose it's not a surprise that there might be a baby involved. And really, that's all you kind of need to know about the setup. Because what this book isn't is very plot driven. We've got kind of two timelines. So we have the present day, where they're dealing with the pregnancy, and Reese has really complex feelings about being perceived as a father, because while they have detransitioned, they're not super comfortable with those kind of assumed patriarchal, like super masculine roles, like being a dad, blah, blah, blah. And so Ames's proposition to Katrina is that they try and find a way to co-parent as a three, because Reese has always wanted children and is desperate to be a mother. And it's incredibly hard for trans women to become parents, basically, unless they have a child pre-transition. So we follow them in the kind of present, and then we go back in time, and we also see sort of the beginnings, middles, and ends of Reese and Amy's relationship. And it's just really, really fascinating. I think, wait there. I think as a cisgendered person, I mean, I do move in queer circles, but really all I really knew about detransition and the process of detransitioning was that it was kind of used as a tool by the right wing to discredit trans identity. And that anytime someone detransitioned, it was seen as, oh yeah, because they regret being trans in the first place, or they were pressured into it, or they like, whatever. But actually, what this book is incredible at doing is really getting you to understand the nuance of experience that people have with their gender and with womanhood and with motherhood. And I just thought it was so detailed and nuanced and really, really thought-provoking. It definitely made me think and check a lot of my assumptions. Not just about kind of trans identities, but about motherhood and femininity and what that means. Because you have these three people who all have different relationships with womanhood and motherhood or parenthood, and it's just so well drawn. I mean, there's not a huge amount of plot to speak of, it's very much a character study, and you do just sort of get in and under the skin of these three people to sort of try and understand their perspectives. And every time I felt like Torrey Peters had gone kind of like too hard on one character, or like one character was being a bit like villainized, you'd get the other perspective and see how complex it was. And what I really liked and respected was that, because this setup could have been used to kind of write this queer utopia of alternate parenting, but what Torrey Peters does is she puts that yearning and hope for that in there, and she doesn't break it, but she puts it in the real world and really looks at it carefully and practically. And so, like, actually, how do three people in this situation think about raising a child together? What does that mean? And how does that work practically as well as emotionally and things? And so she doesn't shy away from the actual difficulties of doing that. And I really liked it. I don't think it's going to be like a favorite book. I do think it was like a little touch too long in the midsection, but the women are going to stay with me, and I thought it was incredibly detailed and interesting. It does. Am I going to say that? No, that's spoilery. Just message me if you want to know my thoughts on the ending. I don't want to talk about the ending. But yeah, so I've had a good time the first time. Farmer talked about it feeling like a bit like a soap, and I kind of feel like I know what she means. Like, it was a lot of scenes and you're just kind of following people's lives, as opposed to like it feeling like plotty. But I also think it's got more brevity, like it's got more seriousness than a soap, and not in that kind of like pseudo real life melodrama way, like genuine seriousness. But yeah, I really liked it. So well done, Farms. That is a 1 out of 1 strike rate so far. I think next I am going to read Cuddy. And the reason I'm going to go to Cuddy next is because it's the only one that Farmer hasn't read on this list. And I've managed to convince her to join me later on in this video, or possibly in a later video, to discuss all 7 books. And so I want to read that one so that I can give it to her and she can read it before the end of this vlog, and then we can maybe both rank all 7 books and see how similar we are. That might be a fun exercise. So yeah, Cuddy next. I'll show you how my rhubarb comes out. Hopefully it'll be decent. I like to, just in case you're interested, roast my rhubarb with a little bit of sugar, a little bit of vanilla, and either a little bit of orange juice or a little bit of apple juice, depending on what you have available. I currently only have oranges, so that's what we're doing. And yeah, just low and slow. So we'll see how that comes out. I'm gonna have it in my overnight oats and then maybe make a pie. Maybe make a pie, but I'm not gonna be here, and my partner is currently not here. And I don't think I have the self-restraint to make an entire pie and not eat an entire pie. So we'll see, but I will catch you later. Bye. Hey. I've just picked up Cuddy. I haven't even started reading it yet. So I knew nothing about this except that Benjamin Myers is a Northeast author. And that this was historical, but it's actually sort of a sort of retelling of the life of St. Cuthbert, who's like the unofficial patron saint of the Northeast. But it's got really cool layout and like style vibes. Let me show you. I can't do it one-handed, but there you go. Doesn't that look intriguing, exciting, yum? I mean, when it's got runic end papers, I mean. Hey, I'm trying not to get too excited, but I'm really fucking liking Cuddy so far. I'm not very far into it at all. It's so odd. So it is about St. Cuddy, St. Cuthbert, but it begins with his death, and then the whole thing is told sort of from the perspective of his corpse / body. So basically, St. Cuthbert, the reason he became a saint is because allegedly, like, 10 years after he died, his body hadn't decayed, and so he was like declared a saint. He was the Bishop of Lindisfarne, which is Holy Island up in Northumberland. And it's giving me like Lincoln in the Bardo vibes with how this book is constructed. It's very, very odd. But a lot of the like first part is written in verse, and the language is like really playful. So we've had a little prologue. We've had this like excerpt at the start of book 1, which is just like 10 pages of really short clips from non-fiction that essentially like build this collage of like the time that has passed since Cuddy's died to the present day. And basically his body was moved from Lindisfarne because of the threat of the Viking invasion. So they moved his body in case it got desecrated. And then basically these monks were in charge of moving his body around the country and sort of keeping it safe. I think that's what's going on anyway. And so we've had the kind of non-fiction bit where it's like laying that scene. And then we've had this sort of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead-esque scene between these two monks who are carrying the body. And then there's this little poem from the perspective of Cuddy, which it's just like, it's so playful the way he's using language. So I'm going to do my best to read it for you in a vaguely good way. On and on they go, this way, that way, day upon day, just two voices amening amongst the many. In this colourful caravan of committed Cuddy acolytes, this coffin-carrying cult, forever on the flit, forever making camp and breaking camp, consulting maps drawn only in Northland's dirt with crooked sticks and no shortage of uncertainty, all the while bearing the ultimate burden, the bandage-bound body of the beer-mounted saint himself, he, formerly the most earnest and humble Cuthbert of Melrose and Dunbar, from up there at the Firth of Forth, then later a wandering herder of lost souls, and a man of great visions and miracles, and more latterly first bishopric of Lindisfarne, then hermit on a large rock, then hermit on a small rock, then a corpse in a stone box. Cuddy. It's just, I'm aware of how many books I'm going to be reading in this vlog, so I'm going to try and not like keep stopping to tell you stuff, but this is very cool. I'm really enjoying it. Briefly, when I said from when Cuddy died to the present day, I meant the present day of what is currently happening right now, which is around 995 AD. So I think like 100 years after Cuddy has died. So like very much not the present day now, but the present day of the first bit of the first book. This is going to be so confusing and hard to explain. Back to what I was saying. Hello. I've just been thoroughly rained on, and I'm here to briefly talk to you about Cuddy by Benjamin Myers, because Farmer is on her way over here imminently to pick it up, and then I will not have it anymore while she reads it. When I started reading this book, as you might have guessed from the little the short little clips that I filmed, I was really excited by the start of this book. I thought this was going to be my favourite book of the year. And I do think it's a really good book. But for me, it didn't quite live up to the promise of the first section. So let's backtrack. It is sort of what I thought it was going to be. I think I said in that clip that I thought it was maybe going to be like kind of like the ghost of Cuddy. It's not that, but it's basically an alternate history. Well, not even an alternate, just a fictionalized history of the Northeast. So it's got 4 main books in it, and those books are separated by hundreds of years. So the first book, the one that I was reading in the first few clips, was the 11th century, when the body of Cuddy had been sort of removed from Lindisfarne, and these pilgrims, monks, were kind of running his body all over the Northeast, trying to find a place of safety in the wake of the Danish invasion. And that book, some of this might be spoilery. It's not excessively spoilery, because this isn't really it's not really a book you can spoil. But at the end of that, it begins with them founding Durham. So the city of Durham exists because of Durham Cathedral, and Durham Cathedral exists because of St. Cuthbert. So then in the second book, so that first book, I'll talk you through the books, what they're about, and the kind of style they're written in. Because I think for me, my waning enjoyment was to do with style. I do think Benjamin Myers is a really, really good writer. He's very clever. And I think if you have a low tolerance for pretension, this may not be the book for you. But that first book, where there's a group of monks and a girl who's basically been taken in by this group of monks, and it's told through verse, largely from her perspective. She's talking to the ghost of Cuddy. She has these visions. I think possibly she's epileptic. And it's written in this verse style that reminded me so much of George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo, and I really, really liked Lincoln in the Bardo. And that's book 1. The second book is during the building of the cathedral. So the cathedral's been built. It's like 200 years after. And it's following a woman whose arsehole husband is away fighting, and she becomes romantically entangled with a stonemason who's working on the upkeep in the cathedral. And that one is told in second person, which I am always a little bit unsure of. And it was good. It was interesting. It wasn't as interesting, and the style didn't feel as perfectly in harmony with the content as it did in the first book. My biggest complaint about this book is that I wish the whole fucking thing was written in verse. I suspect Benjamin Myers has thought very carefully about the styles for each book. And there's this very specific reason, I'm sure, that he has chosen what he has chosen as the main stylistic conceit of each section. I just wish the whole thing was written in verse. I loved that first section so much. So that's the second section. The third section is this sort of Victorian diary. And that was the bit that made me think, oh, is he riffing on like common styles of storytelling from each of these eras? Because that epistolary, like diary novel is such a Victorian thing. So there's that. And that's this like arsehole professor who has been invited to come to Durham to... Oh my God, let it out, buddy. What a sigh. He's been invited to Durham to witness the opening of Cuddy's grave, because there are, between the Protestants and the Catholics, there's political benefit for some people for Cuddy's tomb to be opened and it be proved that he is not a saint, because they believe that his corpse is uncorrupted, or some people believe his corpse is uncorrupted, and so some people want to open up his tomb and see. So you've got that, and that's got real kind of like gothic vibes to it, but it was the section I think that I enjoyed the least. The final section is the modern day 2019, and we follow a young man who's 19 who ends up in and around the cathedral. Like the cathedral, as much as it's Cuddy, it's also the cathedral. Like, you know, when people say like the city was a character in this book, the cathedral is a character in this book. I'm sorry if my thoughts are all over the place and I'm not being... I'm very aware that I'm like picking and choosing little things to say, and this is probably, you're probably watching this like slow down. So I will try. I'm very conscious that like Farmer's going to come and take this book away from me. So I want to say what I've got to say while I physically got it in my hand. Not because I like a prop, but just in case I want to flick through. So the final section is, as I said, following a young man who kind of ends up working in and around it. And I think what's brilliant about this book, like thematically, I think this was excellent. I still think this is a really good book, really impressive. I will definitely be reading other books by Benjamin Myers. I think his writing in the first and fourth sections were just beautiful. Like I said, stylistically, those middle two sections didn't work so well for me. Now, I think that is sort of inevitable when you are chopping and changing the styles so much, and you're also moving hundreds of years between, so there's no kind of character through line. Again, that's kind of why this feels like the essence of Cuddy and the cathedral is so central, because actually that's the unifying force through the book. But there's all kinds of themes going on in the background that I kind of can't really talk about in huge detail in the context of this video, because I could talk about it for hours. But there was a lot about class and politics and what these emblems of society mean to us, and who these monuments are for, and how connected or not connected we all are to the history of the places that we now inhabit. And again, it's one of those ones where I mean, Durham, obviously it's not very far away from where I live. It's 10 minutes on the train. But it's not a city that I know very well. I've been to it, 10, 15 times, but I've never spent any huge amount of detail. I've never been inside the Durham Cathedral, actually, and this has made me want to go in. But even just being in the Northeast, it was giving me the kind of like warm and fuzzies the way I get when I read books that are set up here. But I think there were parts of this book, as I said, that reminded me of Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. There were parts of this that had a kind of Hilary Mantel like preoccupation with the detail of big epic moments in history. Did I just get side-eyed in the background by Lewin? I think I did. What? It also reminded me weirdly of what it really reminds me of is the BBC documentary series A House Through Time that David Olusoga does, who coincidentally is also from the Northeast. And I love this program so much. He basically takes a house and tells the history of that house, so goes back in time through all the people who have lived in that house, and it's a really interesting, really personal way of looking at social history. And in lots of ways this book felt like that too. But yeah, I really liked it. I really recommend it. The fourth section did bring me back up very close to where I was at the start of the book. But yeah, apparently I just want to read stuff that's written in verse. So if you have any recommendations, I know Max Porter. I still haven't read any Max Porter, and I know that is going to be the thing that people recommend. But so I'm aware that I'm sleeping on Max Porter. But if I'm sleeping on anyone else who writes kind of novels in verse, then let me know. Yeah, actually, oh look, there's Max Porter on the back of the book. I liked it very much. I will definitely be reading other books by Benjamin Myers. So I finished that a couple of days ago, actually. And I am now about 200 pages into The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I'm not going to talk about that too much now, partly because I do think it's one of those books that you kind of need to know. I kind of feel like I need to know where we're going. At the moment, I'm finding it, for a book that I thought was going to be a quick, easy read, I'm finding it quite hard work. It's quite busy in terms of the rules of the narrative, and like I'm finding it actually like quite difficult, more difficult than I was expecting. It does involve elements of time travel, which I'm not always very good with. I'm always interested, but like something about that, just like cognitively, I sometimes really struggle to process. So I am middling on that one so far, but I think the proof will be in the pudding, by which I mean it is a whodunit. So yeah, I'll chat more to you about that when I've read it, but I'm not so sure about that one at the moment. There's also some really quite shocking fat phobia in it, which again I will probably talk to you about in the next section, but it was been really quite off-putting. So Lewin says it best. Big sigh. I'm off to clean my house. Tatty bye. It's okay. Where's your stick? Okay. Hello. Oh gosh, we're wonky. Hang on. I have finished my third book. I'm not going to talk about this for too long because I have literally just finished it, and I have a date to watch Doctor Who with my friends. So I don't know because I didn't enjoy reading about 90% of this book. 90% of this book. I was interested enough in the concept. So, in this book, there is a man who wakes up in the body of, wakes up with no memories. And it becomes clear that he is in this country house to solve a murder. And the conceit of the book is that every day he will wake up in the body of another character in this house until he solves the murder. And that will happen 8 times. And if he hasn't solved the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, then he will have his memory wiped and the whole thing will go again. And I was interested enough in the kind of premise of it, but there were a few challenges. Firstly, the whole setup felt really contrived. And it was interesting actually because I read there's a note at the end that Stuart Turton, I'm sorry if you can hear Lewin repulsively chewing his leg, but Stuart Turton wrote this note at the end of the book about why the book was written. And basically he had a next door neighbour when he was a kid who used to buy him Agatha Christie books, and he was obsessed with writing an Agatha Christie book. This was when he was 8. But all through his life he's kind of wanted to write this whodunit Agatha Christie book, and he kept struggling to do it because she'd used up all of the twists and turns and he couldn't think of anything. And then he was in this jet-lagged state on a flight at 2:00 in the morning and had this idea of this kind of looping, time jumping, body hopping. And that's a bit what it felt like. It felt like a writer desperately trying to construct something. And that, for me, wasn't enjoyable to read. I also think just as a reader, it was really hard because there were some interesting things going on, because when he's inside the body of these different people, he sort of takes on elements of their personality, and it becomes a bit unclear about how much is him and how much is the body, the host that he's inhabiting. And that made it really hard to kind of sustain my interest in him. Also, I did find that let's also preface this with, I am Hannah lost the plot. This book had far too much plot in it for me ever to enjoy it. It was there was too much going on, because as well as the body hopping thing, there's this guy dressed as a plague doctor who's trying to sort of help him but maybe sort of hinder him, and maybe is the reason he's there, and we don't know. You're trying to figure out what's going on there. There's this random footman who keeps trying to kill him. He's allegedly got these rivals. He's trying to work out who he can trust, but the whole thing felt like you were just blundering through it with him. And it felt like we never knew what was going on. And then there'd be this big expositional reveal from one of the characters. And then we'd carry on blundering along. And I got whiplash. I didn't understand it. I am also, and again, this is not his fault, I don't think I'm very good with time. I either get it, or I think I get it and then I overthink it, or I don't get it. It's one of those things. I may just not be smart enough to hold all of the threads. But I kept not understanding why certain things were happening, or why, and I couldn't work out if
if I was finding like gaps in the plot or if I was just not understanding something. And that's a really frustrating experience to be in as a reader. Like, I still don't, and if you've read this, please let me know in a comment down below, but put like spoilers. What's the footman's deal? I still don't know. I still don't really get why he was there and why he was trying to kill him the whole time. I don't get it. I did think the twist I saw coming, the overall twist, but there were like nuances within the twist that I did think were interesting. I think for me, there were a lot, some of it really felt like a romp, but for me, it was too long and it had too much plot for me to feel like this is just a casual romp, because like it took me too long. I had to spend too long in it. I don't want to romp this much. But yeah, so this was, I wondered if I'd like this one. I actually think I preferred The Devil in the Dark Water because it was camper. This wasn't very camp. It was quite earnest. Devil in the Dark Water, or Devil and the Dark Water, whatever it's called, his second novel, I kind of think I preferred that. But yeah, so hey, I mean, she couldn't knock it out of the park with every book selection. And I was actually a bit worried about, because I've got this plan. Have I told you this before in this vlog? So what I'm going to do for the rest of this video, I'm going to carry on vlogging my experience reading the books, and then I'm going to rank them according to what I liked. I'm going to guess Farmer's ranking. We're going to film a part 2 of this together where we guess each other's rankings and have like a chat about the books, because I know she doesn't like all of the books that she recommended to me because she's a bullshit friend. She's not a bullshit friend. She's just trying to keep me on my toes. So yeah, interesting. What to pick next? I think I'm feeling Maggie O'Farrell. I didn't trust this man. I a bit didn't trust him. And you know who I trust? Maggie O'Farrell. So that's what we're going to do next. Heidi, hi. I have finished The Marriage Portrait. I really liked this. This is a historical fiction novel by Maggie O'Farrell, author of Hamnet and many other things, but Hamnet is the only other thing that I have read by her. And this follows the life of a real person, someone who really existed, Lucrezia de Medici, who was the daughter of the Duke of Tuscany in the 1500s, and she was had an arranged marriage to a Duke of Ferrara. I don't know how to say it. God, and I've got Italian heritage. Ferrara? All I can think is Ferrero Rocher. The Duke of Ferrero Rocher. And it's about her life and her marriage to the Duke. And it is loosely based on fact. And I went to a talk that Maggie O'Farrell did. I think I mentioned that for the release of this book. And she was talking about how she was, her initial inspiration was the Robert Browning poem, My Last Duchess, which I don't know if that is a well-known poem outside of England, but I think lots of us will have studied it at school. At least I definitely did it. It was in the GCSE anthology the year that I did my English GCSEs. And that is a poem by Robert Browning about this Duke that has this portrait, this very beautiful portrait of his young former wife, and he keeps it behind these drapes, doesn't let anyone look at it without his permission. And in the poem, which I should have reread before filming this, I can't remember if explicitly says, implies, or if the narrative voice of the poet implies it. It doesn't matter. I'll link I'll link the poem down below. You can have a read. I'm pretty sure it's a dramatic monologue, so him maybe. That he killed her. That's all you need to know, is that it was intimated in the poem, either explicitly or implicitly, that he killed his last Duchess / first Duchess. And none of that is a spoiler for this book, because it opens with Lucrezia having just completed this journey that has left her a little bit baffled. She's with her husband. They're already married at this point. They've been married for, I think, maybe like a year, maybe just under a year. And we aren't privy to all of the kind of context that leads her to this conclusion, but she comes to the conclusion in the opening chapter that he's going to kill her. She realizes, there's a moment at dinner where she goes, oh my God, he's going to kill me. And then the book unfolds from that point. So we know this terrible thing is maybe going to happen, or at least that she suspects it. And then we go back in time. We learn a lot about her parents, even before she is born, but then her childhood, we get to know her. And then it's interspersed with these chapters that really bring the pace back down and look much more in detail at what happens at that dinner and the following events. So it's got this kind of split timeline, and as we move through the novel, the timelines converge at the end. And I thought in general it was really brilliantly done. The last 50 pages of this book, my entire body was like, just, oh. I thought it was very, very deftly done, the way the tension builds throughout the book. As with my experience of Maggie O'Farrell's writing in Hamnet, I think she works really well in that kind of split timeline space. She's very good at kind of building these very enriched backstories for characters, and I think the way she created Lucrezia was really, really interesting as this sort of overlooked slightly daughter, and one who isn't a natural fit for the aristocratic life that she's been born into. There's lots of lots of kind of imagery throughout the book around this idea of being imprisoned or being trapped, and even the process of, it covers in quite a lot of depth, actually getting that portrait painted. And Lucrezia herself is a kind of budding artist, and the descriptive passages where Maggie O'Farrell is talking about art and painting, I particularly liked. So this was a big hit. I don't want to talk about the plot in too much detail, because I think you know what you need to know about it. But I think the characters involved were all really interesting. I think Maggie O'Farrell is a wonderfully textured writer. She puts a lot of detail in at points in the first third of the book. I thought there were some instances where it was a bit too descriptive, and I was getting a bit frustrated at the kind of descriptive passages. Felt like they were a bit getting in the way of the story and the narrative building. But I do think it was really, really well done. And there's a scene that I remember Maggie talking about actually in that talk with a tiger, because her dad has this kind of menagerie of animals in the kind of basement area of their massive sort of complex that they live in Tuscany. And there's this whole part about him acquiring this tiger, and Lucrezia going down and seeing this tiger and interacting with it. And it's a brilliant sort of piece of foreshadowing, but also she really captured this, because for us, even those of us who haven't like seen a tiger in real life, you know, we've seen pictures of tigers, we're like, yeah, that's what a tiger looks like. But she really captures that moment of being, you know, how in the past people would have had no idea what these things actually look like, and like how incredible some creatures are that actually we don't quite notice in the modern day because we've seen pictures of them. And I think she landed that really beautifully in this book. So yeah, this was a big hit. I don't think I loved it as much as I loved Hamnet, but I did really love Hamnet. So I think there's no shame in me not liking this one as much. I think the Hamnet for me had a much bigger emotional wallop than this book did, but I also think the most significant emotions that are happening in Hamnet, grief, loss, all that stuff, are maybe just more, she was going after different emotions, I guess. Like she wasn't trying to make me cry in this book. She was trying to make me feel something else, and I did feel those something else emotions quite a lot. So yes, still a big fan of Maggie O'Farrell, which is great, and I'm glad I enjoyed that one. I'm also about halfway through Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I'm really liking, but I'm like slap bang in the middle of like having absolutely no fucking idea what's going on. So I'll talk to you about that when I'm finished. And I have just started, I've read about 50 pages of Really Good Actually by Monica Heisey. So I'm picking the pace up a little bit now with the reading, as it's the school holidays, so I've got a little bit more time. I'm not off in the summer, but I do work reduced hours in the summer, so I get a little bit more reading done in these months. This I'm enjoying. I'm finding it funny. It's feeling like millennial Bridget Jones, but yeah, we will talk about that at a later date. And now I'm gonna go eat a vegan chicken Kiev. Bye!
Good job.
Hi, I finished another book. I finished reading Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and I really liked it. This book won the Women's Prize in 2021, so it's not a hot take to be like, I thought this was great. But I do think it's quite a divisive book. I know it is not universally loved, and I can see why. It is a book that requires a lot of open-mindedness and a lot of trust, I think, from the reader. But for me, totally paid off. So we are following the main character, Piranesi, who lives in a world unlike ours. It is sort of a series of hallways and halls and rooms. It's like the entire world exists within this sort of infinite, massive kind of fancy house, basically. And there's like the lower level, which is submerged in water, and there are tides and things, and there's an upper level, which is where the birds live, and there's a middle level, which is largely where Piranesi lives. And it is not a very populated world. He lives there along with one other man who he calls the Other. Piranesi is a name that the Other has given to Piranesi, though he's not entirely sure that that is his name. Sort of feels intuitively like that's not his name, but he doesn't know what other name to call himself by. So he goes by Piranesi. And the book begins really with Piranesi's kind of day-to-day life, which is essentially cataloguing this world. So as I said, it's kind of these limitless numbers of rooms and chambers. So he goes into each hall and he catalogues what's there and is sort of getting adept at finding his way around this this unusual world. And there's lots of statues and things like that he catalogues in these journals. And I think this is where the open-mindedness begins, and I think why a lot of people might not get on with it or even might DNF it, because it is very slow to begin with. It's just, you're just sort of there with Piranesi, you don't know who he is, you don't really know what's up with this world, and she's not really explicit about telling you what's going on. But if you get past that first initial bit, and I still really enjoyed that part, but I think if you're the kind of reader who gets frustrated by having lots and lots of questions, then I can see why this would be a difficult book to read. I don't mean that in like a condescending way. I just mean like it probably wouldn't be a book for you. But I really liked it. So as we progress, Piranesi is sort of forced to confront some questions about who he is and where he is and how he got there and why there is no one else there. And I kind of can't really talk about it in much more detail than that, because I think it was done so well. I don't want to spoil it for other people, but it reminded me sort of like, it explores similar territory, I think, to Jorge Luis Borges's Labyrinths. There's definitely a story in that where there's like, I think it's a never-ending library. So that obviously quite similar. It also reminded me a lot of House of Leaves by Mark Danielski. Is that who wrote that book? And it's not as extensive as the House of Leaves, and it's not as formally challenging, but it definitely reminded me of that. But I thought it was really, really good. I really liked the character of Piranesi. Felt very, very well judged in terms of keeping him, managing that sort of, he has these sorts of moments of realization that could have felt really expositional and clunky, and for me worked really, really well. I thought the ideas that were being grappled with were really interesting. There's kind of a like Platonic philosophy thing going on with it that reminded me of like my A-levels, but like in a good way. I thought it was really interesting and really, really super readable for a book that is quite challenging in terms of, like I said, she's not very forthcoming as a writer. So you have to be kind of comfortable with not really knowing what's going on and just accepting that all will become clear. Crucially, there's, I think also, and I think this is probably a criticism that some people might level at it, because the mechanics of the world are not very, she doesn't go into details about how things work. And for me, that didn't bother me at all. But I do think some people, particularly maybe, because I think this is technically fantasy, I guess, or like fantasy adjacent, literary fantasy maybe. And I think for some people, like the ambiguities about how the world works might be a cause of frustration, but for me, it didn't at all get in the way of me enjoying it. And actually, like, I quite liked that wasn't covered in a huge amount of detail. So sorry if I sound, I'm really trying not to spoil anything. So if that just doesn't make sense, then fuck it, skip it. But yeah, really, really, really enjoyed it. I think maybe one of my favorites that I've read in this video so far. Farmer is doing very well, isn't she? It's been very good. Other than the Stuart Turton, I've been having a lovely time. Perfect. Cool. Well, I am gonna love you and leave you there. I'm halfway through Really Good, actually. I'll catch you up about that. And then I've just got his bloody project to start, which is not very long. And then I will have read all 7 of these books. I've got no idea how long this video is going to be. Sorry if it's a long one. Cool. See you later. Bye. Finished the last 2 books, so we're going to be wrapping up now. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is Really Good, actually, by Monica Heisey. This is a book that is about a woman called Maggie who is in her late 20s, and she is in, the book takes place in the immediate aftermath of her marriage breaking down. And so she's been with her husband for quite a while, but they'd only actually been married for maybe about 18 months. And so she's feeling a lot of feelings, and she's feeling them quite profoundly. And she's our main character. This reminded me quite a lot of the kind of Bridget Jones style of book. Monica Heisey is very, very funny. And this is a very funny book. I would almost, for my taste, it was almost funny to a fault, in that it was like cracking the whip so much that it was getting in the way a little bit for me of like actually enjoying it. And sometimes I wish she hadn't kind of played everything for laughs, and that more things were left a little kind of genuinely emotive rather than the defense. It felt quite defensive sometimes, the humor in here, which is also true of the character. And I do think it was really interesting to read a book about a woman who is going through a divorce relatively young, because I do think that is an experience that is not often explored in media. But I struggled a little bit with this one. I found the main character, Maggie, quite unlikable, and it reminded me a little bit of 2 things. It reminded me a bit of Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, because that was another one where I knew I was supposed to be on the side of the protagonist despite their flaws, but like I just couldn't quite get there. I couldn't quite get on their level. And it also reminded me a bit of Lena Dunham's series Girls, which I only watched the first series of, but there is this sort of I don't know, just this quite like dramatic quite dramatic sort of character that like I struggled to believe her sometimes, and she got a little ridiculous for my taste. But I do think some of the parts where she did take her foot off the comedy gas a bit, there were some moments that were really, really hard hitting around her sort of sense of failure and having lost the sort of security of it, and I really felt it at points. I mean, she's talking about, you know, the fact that she's been pretty much her entire adult relationship with her partner, and the thought of having to exist she's not had to exist as an adult on her own before. And I got that because I've been with my partner since I was 21. So like, I kind of get that fear of like, I only know myself as an adult when I am an adult in a relationship with you. And if we take you out of the equation, I don't know what I don't know how to balance that equation on my own. Do you know what I mean? So like, I thought this was really readable. I do think it was a good time. I do think the bisexual rep was a bit, it wasn't bad. It was just a bit underexplored in my opinion. But then I'm fussy about stuff like that because I'm always banging on about how there's not enough good bisexual rep, and then every time there is, I'm like, But yeah, I would really recommend it as a like holiday. It's like a good holiday read. It's a great summer read, and I do think it's personal taste that I didn't so much get on with how relentless the humour was. I don't read a lot of funny books, so like for me, the humour was just pulling me out of it a little bit too often. But I know lots of other people really enjoyed it, and if you like a funny book, this may well be one that you want to pick up. But I mean, it's pretty famous, so you probably already have picked it up if it was of interest to you, but just in case, there's that. And then the final book was His Bloody Project by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet, and this is totally different. It's really good, actually. There is not a funny fucking moment in this book. So this is sort of presented as a series of true found documents relating to this triple murder that happened in the 1860s in the Highlands of Scotland. And it's written as if the perpetrator of those murders is the sort of ancestor of the author, which is why it's like the documents relating to the case of Roderick Macrae and Graeme Macrae Burnet is the author. So it starts almost like as a bit of there's like this preface that the author wrote being like, yep, I went and I found all these documents relating to this murder that happened. And then we get a series of different kind of like found documents, including statements that were made by people. And a big chunk of the book is almost like this confessional piece written by Roderick Macrae, who did commit these murders, these three murders, and it's sort of him explaining why he did that. And then we go on and get some medical reports, and then we have the trial transcript documents. So it's kind of like this sort of pseudo found footage idea, but with a kind of real historical bent to it. And I quite liked that. I think it was a book that was exploring really interesting ideas, because while it was about the crime, it was really interesting the way it looked at perspective and also kind of truth, and actually how subjective truth can be, because the murderer believes that he was justified in his killing because the main person that he wanted to kill had been sort of persecuting his father and making it kind of impossible for him to live. And he thinks that what he did was quite rational and reasonable. But then his defense counsel want to present him as mad, and want him to plead insanity. And it was really, really interesting, actually, that kind of exploration of how we to what extent we are ever able to understand motive, and who gets to decide what a reasonable reason for killing someone is, because almost like the act of murder is so irrational anyway that what does a rational murder look like? What does a sane murder look like? Because the idea is so abominable to most people that kinda to do it you've got to be a bit mad. But yeah, I think it was really, really interesting. There were still reveals made throughout it. I'm not talking too much about the other murders because you discover what they were along the way, and I think the moments of quiet revelation that Graeme Macrae Burnet has throughout the book were really, really interesting. I think its exploration of kind of like the fiefdom system was also really interesting. There was a lot in there about class and kind of poverty cycles, and how the kind of hierarchical nature of society perpetuates these sort of unbreakable cycles of poverty for those who are living at the opposite end of the power sort of dynamic. And that was all really interesting. I think the writing style it didn't like blow me away, but there were some really nice kind of moments in it. But I also think because we're dealing with sort of pseudo found fiction, found documents rather, it kind of, the writing style was very appropriate to what the book overall was doing, but it wasn't exactly, you know, what am I saying? What am I saying? Lost my train of thought there. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting literary thriller, and it's sort of, even though it's sort of historical, there's enough in it about the way people responded to this crime and to the criminal, and what must have been going through his mind, or what kind of person he must have been, it sort of was doing, weirdly. If you've seen the reading vlog where I read Penance by Eliza Clarke, which is a book that's also kind of a book within a book, true crime thing, that I actually found a little disappointing in the way it explored those themes. I actually think even though this is like a historical true crime, for me, this was much more successful at really finding those moments of these two stories are not adding up, or this version seems like totally legit until you see this version. And there's this gap of understanding and experience that's really difficult to bridge sometimes. And I think this was more successful at doing that than Penance was. So yeah, it was the first thing I'd read by Graeme Macrae Burnet, and I enjoyed it. I don't think it's going to be like a firm favourite, but I'm definitely going to check out more of his books. I do think it was very interesting and very clever. But yeah. So I've now read all the books. I was going to do a ranking, but actually I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this video here, and then Farmer and I are going to sit down together and we're going to guess each other's rank order, and then share our rankings of the 7 books. So we'll do that separately and have like a bit of a chat about how we both felt about all of the books, because we will both have read them all by that point. So if you are interested in watching that, you might want to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out. And if you've liked and enjoyed this video, it would be lovely for you to actually like this video. And yeah, hopefully I will see you again soon. Bye.